Hey students, I just went for a walk. I've got a little bit of energy. We're going to do a class activity that normally I really like to do in teams in the classroom. Going to modify for our adapted environment learning here in the living room. So we're going to be looking at the subdisciplines of kinesiology. So if you remember our family tree, subdisciplines are considered what I consider the grandchildren in my little analogy. So I'm going to make myself just a bit smaller and we'll go through what we've got cooking for this activity. So first of all, why do we have all these different groups? That's one thing I haven't gone over yet. Each of these groups have their own professional organizations, their own research lines, certifications for being a practitioner or a clinical professional in that field. Many of these have their own academic preparation track, so that could be a major in college. A lot of them are more graduate-oriented programs. They have conferences, networking events, you name it. And so one nice thing that we have about all of these is they have pretty good organization. Throughout that kind of decade of the 1960s out there is when there was a shift from this global idea of physical education of just anything and everything, and anyone could do what they want and call themselves essentially a trainer or a coach or an expert. After the 60s, of these subdisciplines started to form all of the organizations that you see right here, and aspects of those organizations came with them. So as we started to add in a lot more credibility, things really started rolling. So here's what this challenge is going to entail. So I'm going to show you a scenario or a situation here on the screen, and then I have some fun little post-it notes for you, but if we do this in class, it'd be a competition. But we're going to identify which of the subdisciplines would apply and how might they be applied, and maybe even interact or intersect with some of the other subdisciplines that we've got. So if you forgot, here is our full list that we've got. Every single one of these, I've got a little post-it note for, so you can expect to see a couple different post-it notes. And then when I pull up these notes and kind of give a short little overview of what might apply, that's where you're going to want to grab that pen and jot down some of the examples of what that subdiscipline and that profession actually does. So here we go. First scenario, you are an NCAA Division II athletic assistant or assistant athletic director, and you have to make a recommendation statement for all the athletes and to make a policy essentially on what guidelines for students, athletes, should exist for what they can and cannot post on their social media platforms. So basically, you have to write a policy that relates to managing and to some extent some policing of what can and can't be posted. So as I look at my array I've got over here in my situation, I definitely think there's going to be some level of sport management that's going to be involved. So sport management is essentially the application of management of anything in the athletic space. That's from people to coaches to referees, officials, the buildings themselves, and especially policy, practices, legal issues, and also funding. So we know for sure sport management is going to be one of those situations. And from a career standpoint, an athletic director, especially collegiately, really any level, high school and higher, you're going to need to have a graduate degree, and typically they're going to look for one in educational leadership or potentially sport administration or sport management. So we know this one for sure applies to that situation. Something that we might even want to consider is sport sociology as well. So sport sociology, we know sociology is dealing with people and how people respond. So it's looking at the role of sport in our society and within ourselves. And we know with the rise of social media and being part of everything that we do in life, and we have examples at levels of sport with professional athletes posting on social media and not posting, potentially policies within those organizations, looking at how we as people use social media as a way of expressing freedom of speech and as a way of just expressing ourselves and our values. This could be a factor that might intersect. So this is another subdiscipline. Sports sociology is not necessarily like a major or a minor, or you don't typically see a ton of sports sociologists out there. It's typically a specialty area that you might see a researcher who might be in the space of sociology or communications or maybe even sport education or sport management to some extent, but it's typically going to be more of a, not really a practitioner kind of role, more of a research kind of role that we've got. Maybe, this is my third one, possibly, depending on what we're looking back at, sport history might come into play. Social media hasn't been around too much, but if we're looking at what are maybe past examples in history of where there's been major issues or good use of social media. So that could potentially be a part of it. So that's our first challenge that we've got. Next challenge that we have is you have just been hired to direct USA Hockey's junior hockey off-season conditioning programming. So when we look at that, there's a couple things for sure that come to mind. Exercise physiology comes to mind. Motor development comes to mind. And then another big one, sport performance comes to mind. So here's our three for this one. Why exercise physiology comes to mind. So XPhys basically looks at how studies the physical demands of exercise and movement on the body. So if we're looking at anything related to conditioning, especially this is off season, there's gonna be some sort of adaptation that we want these athletes to accomplish or achieve. And that essentially is gonna be exercise physiology. We know that XPhys is a class that we take that in here in the undergrad program. This also, exercise physiology, is a career path. It's going to be more of a clinical lab type of position, a lot of research that's involved, some application, and we see a lot of master's degrees are in this space. And so that's really, you're looking and studying what happens with the impact of exercise onto the body. So we know we've got exercise physiology. Motor development, why do you think this one comes in? Key word here with the hockey team, it's USA Hockey, it's juniors. And so we know that the junior level, it's going to be not quite youth, it's going to be more that adolescent age, typically up through around age 19. So we're looking at maybe like 15 to 19, give or take a few years, depending on who's in that group. And so we're looking at any aspects of development of just movement capabilities within the body, and the factors that influence that development of movement and related to maturation as well. Because we know we might be seeing a little bit of that tail end of maturation because we're seeing juniors as opposed to senior level athletes. And then we also have sport performance. This is really the key one. So if you're going to be hired by especially a major sport national governing body like USA Hockey, they're going to need you to be a certified strength and conditioning coach. They're going to want you to also have some youth experience. And so sport performance is that particular field or that particular subdiscipline where they're looking for someone who can understand the demands of the sport of hockey, understand what needs to happen in an off season, write programming with phases in that off season that meets those demands, be able to deliver that programming in terms of actively be teaching and coaching it. And so we see in sport performance, it's that crossover. It's really we see a lot of application of XPhys, those concepts of how movement impacts the body, writing programming, teaching and educating in that programming, maybe a little bit, tiny bit of physical education pedagogy, which that PE pedagogy is really the teaching and learning of movement and physical activity. So again, junior hockey players, especially at this high level, a national team level, they probably had quite a bit of training in the sport of hockey. But if you're going to be the strength coach delivering their conditioning, you're not focusing on the X's and O's of playing the game of hockey. You're focusing on how to get them faster, how to get them stronger, how to move more efficiently on the ice, looking at their agility, their reaction time, plenty of things that are in that skill related fitness aspect. And so you are going to have to be able to teach them things. You're going to have to give them lifting and teach them some of those lifts. So you may have some junior athletes who have never done power cleans before, and that's likely going to be a lift that you would have these hockey players do. So there is going to be a key element of teaching the movement. So that also goes hand in hand with sport performance. All right, next up on our list that we've got, NFL Rookie Orientation Symposium Curriculum. That's the laws it up. So basically, it's our NFL Rookie Symposium, and you're in charge of writing what even gets delivered to these NFL rookies when they're showing up that first year that they're on board. So a couple things that come into play here. We've got sport management, because you're looking at managing the aspects of the game. You're not teaching them the sport or not conditioning them, but management is going to be what to do. They're basically how to act, behaviors, consequences that might be in the league, procedures that they have to follow. So think of that as kind of like a big HR meeting for rookies. And so for sure, sport management is going to be a key one that we're going to see. Probably an understanding of sports sociology, of what is impacting people and what's impacting culture at the time of sport and what's really relevant, and being able to deliver that curriculum in a way that the athletes are going to respond to it and understand it. That's going to be pretty key. I think that's it for that one. Those are the big ones for our NFL symposium. Next, this one hopefully should be a few key things should trigger which ones to pick. So you're a middle school PE teacher and you're teaching a lifetime fitness class in middle school, and jump roping is one of the activities, and you have to teach some kids how to jump rope because they never were taught in elementary school, or they never really got a lot of practice in it. So now you have 12, 13, 14-year-olds trying to get them to be fit and use jump roping to get their heart rates up for a cardio lesson, but you have to teach them the X's and O's of how to twirl a rope, how to jump over it. So we know for sure the word teaching is in there. Pedagogy essentially is the art of teaching. So we know physical education pedagogy, it's essentially teaching and learning movement, the process of doing that. PE pedagogy for sure. We know it's middle school, and it also mentioned they never learned it in elementary school. So looking at motor development is going to be really, really key. Understanding the factors that influence their development as a person. So if they never had instruction, if they are missing maybe some maturation types of key stages, very important. We got a new one, motor learning. Motor learning relates to changes in a mover's motor behavior. So changes that they're able to do from going to not being able to jump rope to jump rope as a result of feedback of their performance and just the result of learning. And so we usually see a lot go hand in hand with motor development and motor learning. And then we also see a ton go hand in hand motor learning, which is understanding how does learning happen, what kind of feedback needs to happen, correction happen, and then the art of teaching is applying this kind of feedback. So these two we often see go hand in hand together as well. And little fun fact about teaching jump rope, if you have ever taught anyone how to jump rope, it is really hard to teach, and it's hard to do because jump rope involves a lot of failure and even, I would say, some levels of pain. If you've ever tried to jump rope and you smack yourself with the rope, you whip yourself, it hurts. So we might even have to pull in this aspect of sport and or exercise psychology, where we're trying and practicing something where a lot of the feedback, that's our motor learning side, are negative types of things, getting whipped by the rope, missing it, having to reset a lot. So pulling out some elements from our psychology toolbox of how to keep your middle school students, middle school athletes engaged and sticking with that space. And then maybe at the tail end, if they start to get the jump roping and they're able to actually incorporate it in a workout so it delivers that type of stimulus to get their heart rate up, then we're hitting fitness development. But if they're not able to get jump roping and actually be able to do it, they're still in that motor learning and that physical education pedagogy kind of space, not really able to get fitness benefits quite yet if they can't exactly handle it. Next one is a study that aims to find out who the fittest athletes are in the world and why they are actually the fittest athletes in the world. So a lot of things are going to come into factor here. We for sure are going to be looking at sport performance. There's probably going to be some sort of measurement of why these athletes are on this short list of being the fittest on earth. So that's going to likely involve some sort of measuring their athletic or skill related fitness. We also know that we are going to be having exercise physiology. So this is the study of exercises and movements response on the body. So likely going to be looking, these two will often go hand in hand when we're in a measurement or an assessment type of situation. So we've got these two. Some other things we might want to see or look at: sport history. So taking a look in the past of the who, what, when, where, why of sport. Who has been considered extremely fit in the past? Why was that considered? Does that still apply today? Are we going to use past assessments for current issue or the current type of study that we're looking at, fitness development definitely might come into play. So we typically see this not necessarily always in the athlete side of things. We tend to put that in the sport performance type of space, but depending on our measurements that we're using, fitness development definitely hits some of these same areas. And then we might also be digging into a little bit of sports sociology and looking into, okay, how do we typically define fit as a culture of movers, or what sports do people typically think are going to be really elite fitness types of athletes? And why are we always going to those certain types of sports? Are we going to certain types of bodies that we think are fit or look more fit, and we're ignoring other bodies that might have other characteristics of fitness? So this would be a pretty awesome study. We definitely have some articles and some organizations that claim that their athletes are the fittest on earth, or are like decathletes are like that. CrossFit makes that claim for sure. So I love to hear arguments about that. All right, next, testing and development of a new compression sleeve product. So a passive form of recovery. So if you ever have heard of Normatec sleeves, you'll see athletes sit with them on their legs. So it's a compression type of tool, and they just kind of chill, recovery oriented. So we know exercise physiology, we're looking at the impact of movement or the impact of some sort of this is passive in this case, on the musculature, on the tissues, and their ability to function in a performance kind of way. I mentioned the word performance. So where's my sport performance? This is going to be also involved, because as a sport performance coach, this might be something, if the studies work out and look pretty good, testing and development, we might want to purchase those for our athletes, encourage our teams or athletes to use them. We're going to see a little bit of sport management. That's where we're getting some of our products. It's more of the business side of things, but products and sales and marketing might come into place if these products are actually good. Maybe they might want to find some athletes to sponsor the product and to be influencers or brand reps for that product. So that's definitely going to come into place. And then we'd also, here's a new one we haven't seen yet, is sport medicine. So sport medicine is essentially the prevention and treatment of physical activity or sport related injuries. And so while we're looking at passive recovery more in this situation versus a rehab, would definitely be of interest in the sports medicine community. So if we especially think of physical therapists, athletic trainers that are dealing with athletes on a pretty regular basis, regular training, especially athletic trainer, they would want to know the results of what's going on with the testing of that new product and if it's legitimate too. All right, next, Athletic Hall of Fame induction at your alma mater high school. So talking about managing athletes, not teaching or training them, that's going to be sport management. So that's looking at probably your athletic director is going to be in charge of organizing that. We also see on a local level, school level, sport history. So looking through old stats, who, what, when, why in the past, that's our sport history. And then let's see, I think we also could probably bring in some levels of sports sociology. That might bring in what's valuable in society for someone to be able to go into the Hall of Fame. So if it's more than just certain stats, but if they're a stand-up person, if they've contributed to the community, that's something that might fall in. And then even those aspects of what's valuable, the value system, that could fall a little bit too into the space of sport philosophy. So that's the nature and the reality of sport and who's considered valuable or worth bringing back, worth giving honor or recognition to. Next one, we've got Special Olympics, Winter Games. This is one tip I've got. If you have never been involved with Special Olympics, Paralympics, any of these massive sporting organizations, there's an incredible need and opportunity to train, to serve, to give of yourself to these organizations. And definitely a huge difference between Special Olympics and Paralympics. But this particular question focuses on Special Olympics, and that's a population that's going to be looking at individuals with cognitive impairments, cognitive disabilities that are different from typically developing peers, and also potential physical disabilities. And so we for sure are going to be looking at adapted sport or adapted physical activity. And what this is, how to provide physical activity, exercise opportunities, sport opportunities for individuals who have disabilities. And a different type of process. There's a lot that we need to learn related to motor development in this space. So if we're talking about some differences between an individual and then that individual's typically developing peers, we're going to see a lot come up from that motor development space of their maturation or development of movement patterns. We might see some crossover also with motor learning, just the role of feedback in the learning process and the behaviors that they put out. We know that it could involve some teaching or coaching, depending on what your role is, and very, very key because we have the development and organization of the entire games, sport management. You're managing an event, a venue, getting vendors, getting locations, publicity, dealing with funding, dealing with insurance for the event. Definitely is going to be sport management are involved with that process. Next one, sounds like you're a coach here. You're interviewing for a high school freshman basketball coaching job. So if we think about that high school, we will probably have these two for sure. Physical education, pedagogy. So don't think that this is only just PE teaching. This can fall, the coaching category really, really hits on this, especially if it's coaching of an actual sport versus the development of fitness around for that sport. And then motor development, we know it's high school freshmen. These are 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds. Depending if it's males or females, they're going to be at different stages of puberty. And so huge, huge role that maturation plays in these athletes' bodies and what their bodies can handle. And that's something that you're going to need to know, and also in development of their skill, motor learning for sure, because we're talking about coaching. That's the application of motor behaviors related to feedback and learning environments. And then for high school, sport management will be involved because as a coach, you also probably are going to have to do some organizing of helping with busing. You might have to help find refs. You might have to help find parent volunteers. And then we've also got probably some sport psychology that's going to have to come into play, motivating your team, creating a culture that's conducive for progress and for growth, and hopefully winning. All right, next one. So female athletes at your high school are having an above average incidence of ACL issues, tears, and lower extremity ligament injuries. So first and foremost, that's going to be a sports medicine person who's probably noticing like, hey, we have 6 athletes on this high school girls soccer team who have all had ACL injuries this season. So likely going to be an athletic trainer. It could be a sports medicine doctor or a physician assistant that's assigned to that school or that team, or if it's a hospital or practice that's getting a whole bunch of athletes from this same school or program, they're for sure going to be involved in that process of it. Sports medicine also can incorporate some of the other primary care people, so your actual doctor, your surgeon, ortho, and then we also see some secondary care like physical therapy could also be in this particular space. We're going to see sport performance, sport performance for sure, because this could be potentially the high school strength and conditioning coach if they have one, might need to be doing some talking with their sports medicine staff. If we're seeing this high incidence in the sport of soccer, which definitely has a higher incidence, especially females, is there something, there definitely is, that the sport performance or strength and conditioning coach can do so that those athletes are able to not only rehab well, but also the ones who haven't had issues that are going to be less susceptible. So better stability through their posterior chain, through their glutes, more stability in the musculature surrounding through the knee, learning about change of direction and force absorption. So we're going to see that for sure. Sport performance, and here's a new one that hasn't come up quite yet, sport biomechanics. So this is really looking at physics and how physics plays a role in movement and in bodies. And so we're going to be looking at movement patterns, how the athletes are running, how they're falling, if they're contact or non-contact injuries. So biomechanics for sure plays a role in with the sport performance and sport medicine spaces. And this itself, this is a course that you take biomechanics. And that can be later on after graduate education, a clinical role that you might have. We typically see it more in a research way, but it's applied in a lot of our other spaces. And then we might also see, let's see what else we got. Might see some fitness development. Again, we know we're sport performance oriented, but if we know there is some potential areas in skill rated fitness, and then sports psychology could come out if we're having a lot of athletes with injury, that changes their athlete identity because they're not able to play as much. Their motivation is going to be adjusted. Their whole goal setting process, they're not able to play, or if they're out for a season, is really going to be impacted. So we're also going to see that psychology aspect and element as well. We're going to do one more, last one. So you're on a committee with Michigan High School Athletics Association, and you need to coaches, they call it CAPS. I think my microphone went off, so you can still hear me. They have a coaches advancement program certification. And so to be a coach in Michigan for particular sports, especially at the high school level, you need to take this, it's online modules certification program. And so coming up with that program, probably are going to have some aspects of motor learning and motor development, learning how youth athletes, so high school athletes, are developing, maturing, what are those milestones, and then also how their motor behavior, how their motor behavior is impacted with the feedback and the actual coaching practices. We're probably going to be seeing some sport and exercise psychology, so looking at culture of the team, looking at motivational tactics. And then we're likely also going to be seeing some sports sociology, so looking at people and their role within the sport community, so the role of coaches, the role of culture, the role of leadership, that falls into the sociology space. So for your assignment, you're going to have to continue. I have a few more of these that I have not showed you yet. So hopefully you've taken a few notes on what each of these individual areas mean. And you're going to have to, on your own, for the remainder of the questions, identify which ones apply and why you think that they apply. Good luck and have a good day.